Welcome back to Molding Our Monkeys, where we're on a journey to mold our monkeys and inviting you to come along. Did you know there are advantages to being dyslexic? Stick around and I'm going to tell you about them. Welcome back to part 2 in our series on dyslexia and understanding dyslexia. If you have not seen part 1, I encourage you to pause this video, go check out part 1, and then come back. So there are 4 main strengths with having dyslexia. A book that I've been reading called The Dyslexic Advantage, they refer to them as the mind strengths. So the first strength, the M strength, is the material reasoning. And material reasoning helps us understand the physical and the material world. So the size, the shape, the motion, the relationship of physical objects, and how they relate to each other. So what does that mean as an advantage for dyslexia? People with high material reasoning strengths, their M strengths, are able to view like a 3D world in their head. And a lot of times this has great detail in it. So they may enjoy building with Legos or blocks and that sort of thing more than people without dyslexia. And they also have a high ability to store a digital image in their mind. But a trade-off to that is when you're trying to read, your words are 2D. So if you're visualizing everything in 3D, it's a lot easier to reverse letters, reverse words. And that's a lot of times what makes reading difficult for people with dyslexia. Albert Einstein, who was dyslexic, talks about how he thought non-verbally. And so before he could speak or write something, he had to put his thoughts actually into words. Because he had such that strong material reasoning strength and being able to see things in 3D. So what does that mean for our kids and those that we're working with dyslexia? Oftentimes their work is slower, but more creative. And you might need to adjust your assignments a little bit. Maybe instead of making somebody with a high material reasoning strength write a book report, they can orally give you that book report. Or maybe they get to draw a picture or build a diagram about the setting of a story. Something to make it 3D for them rather than just on paper. The second strength for people with dyslexia is the I strength, the interconnected reasoning. And interconnected reasoning is the ability to spot connections between different objects and concepts or points of view. It's the ability to unite all kinds of information into a big picture view. So some advantages of having high interconnected reasoning is perceiving relationships. They're able to link all these concepts and ideas, maybe some emotions, and to come up with a different storyline based on these different perspectives. They're less likely to respond with the most common answer and more likely to give you the creative answer. Another advantage of an I strength, the interconnected reasoning, is the shifting perspectives. They're able to see things differently very quickly. They might use many different approaches to solve a problem or understand something better. They can borrow many ideas and apply them in new ways. Another advantage of interconnected reasoning is global thinking. They see this big picture. They're able to combine the different parts of this big picture to understand the gist of what they're reading or what they're hearing. So if you think of like a radio signal coming in and out, people with interconnected reasoning skills use the pieces that they get from reading to get the gist of the information. So that makes it a little bit difficult when you're reading and we take away if we dummy down, for lack of a better word, the passage that we want them to read, people with high interconnected reasoning actually struggle more with that because we took away their ability to read the gist. We took away some of the stuff on the outside that helps them make those connections. When it comes to the perceiving relationships, sometimes that's hard because they may seem off target because they're trying to connect so many different parts. They confuse similar words a lot, so they might say adverse instead of adverse, persecute instead of prosecute. They have difficulty screening out irrelevant noise or movement. And when I say that an advantage of interconnected reasoning is shifting perspectives, one of the trade-offs for that is they're easily distracted because they're so busy their minds are so busy trying to make all these connections, even things that aren't the connections they need to be making right now. And they get so reliant on background information and context and trying to get the gist of what's going on that then they struggle being able to focus on the task at hand. And one thing that's really hard for them is that most schools focus on facts to be memorized and without being able to make the connections, whether that's a personal connection because this date means something to them or this topic is something they remember or they've learned something similar about. If they can't make those connections because it's just a random fact, that's going to be a lot harder for people with interconnected reasoning skills to remember. So again, what does that look like in our schools or in our homes? It's important to give students with the high interconnected reasoning skills a background or an overview of what they're going to listen to or what they're going to read. It's also really important to cut out some of that noise and that distraction as they're trying to focus on the important part of the lesson. The third strength in our mind strengths is the in strengths, and that's narrative reasoning. And that's the ability to construct a series of mental scenes from past experiences that then help explain the past or the present or the future. It helps us recall the past, understand the present, and predict the future. Some advantages to narrative reasoning is they're able to put together a novel connection. They're being able to take the different pieces that they know from the past and come up with a new story or come up with a new scenario. One of the things that we talked about in our book is like a geologist. And if you know how erosion happened in the past and you've seen it happen or you can watch it happen now, you can predict better what's going to happen, how this river is going to look, or what we need to do to protect that riverbed, because you can draw off of the stuff that you already know. Narrative reasoning is important in careers like computer game design, financial careers, like I said, geology, some sciences. But there, of course, it comes with some trade-offs too. And the author described this as the family historian with a poor memory. So they're able to make these connections to the big picture, but they have a poor working memory. So being able to finish the task, finish this page that they're supposed to be reading because they're so busy making these bigger connections. Many of the answers to the questions for people with narrative reasoning skills is they come in a story form rather than the cut and dry answer that most teachers are looking for. So again, what does this mean for us who are teaching students with dyslexia? It means that we can't dummy down the information. Don't cut down this passage for the kids that are struggling to read because they need that background. They need to be able to get the context rather than just the facts. They need to be able to make those connections. Rhymes, songs, those sorts of things can help students with the narrative reasoning strengths to remember some of these facts, to help them make some of those connections. Yeah, they'll learn better if they can connect what you're teaching them to something they already know. Don't just give abstract definitions or examples, make it actually connect. The last advantage for dyslexia is the dynamic reasoning, the D strengths. And dynamic reasoning ties very closely into the narrative reasoning, but it helps predict the future and explain the past because they can visualize what happened. So again, like the example of the geologist, you can figure out what's going to happen because you know how things worked in the past. So some other advantages is a high narrative memory and reasoning skills. Their ability to create a continuously connected series of scenes. Oftentimes, people with dyslexia end up being authors because they're able to make these broader connections and these big picture ideas. Some of the dynamic reasoning trade-offs is a reduction in speed and efficiency. They're going to be a little bit slower in giving you the answer. They're going to get the right answer generally, but it might take them a little bit longer to get there. Also, they seem to maybe be zoning out or might seem a little bit lazy because they're turning off their brain in order to solve the problem and make the connections. These types of thinking processes can be hampered by ADHD medication. So if you think about what ADHD medication is supposed to help you with, is helping keep your mind focused. Well, people with this strong dynamic reasoning need to be able to zone out a little bit and shut their brains off a little bit in order to help them make the connections. So if you're seeing some ADHD symptoms, that might not be the best idea is to give them the medication because then it's going to make their brain work harder. And the dynamic reasoning is very difficult in math when you have to show your work, when you need extra time to process the information. So as we're teaching kids in our homes or in a school that have the high dynamic reasoning strengths, they need some extra time to be able to process that. So what does the dynamic reasoning strengths look like in action? 3 times as many dyslexics are entrepreneurs than the general population. So all these advantages, especially the D strengths, they're helping people with dyslexia think outside the box and think more creatively. They have a high ability to form relationships and ask for help and engage people in that help. A lot of times you'll find more of a confident attitude because they're used to having to solve these problems more creatively. So that's our overview of the advantages of being dyslexic. I look forward to seeing you in the next part of our series on making that step to what do we do now for our kids that may have dyslexia.